At the last G7 summit in Hiroshima, Japan reaffirmed its stance on China and Russia, increased its sanctions, strengthened its alliances, and showed the world that it is very serious with the new direction of its foreign policy. Why is it such a bold move? Look at the map. China and Russia are just a mere hours away. And this is in the back of the largest military buildup since World War II. And the Nikkei index just reached a level not seen for the past 33 years. And the Japanese public seems very happy about it. Is it gonna help Japan with its economic and society issues? Well, that's what we're gonna talk about in today's video. My name is Johan from Economia. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about Japan. To understand why it's such an unusual move, we have to look at the map again. There is no peace treaty between Russia and Japan since at the time USSR declared war on Japan at the very end of 1945, and it took over thousands and thousands of prisoners in northern China, then took over the Kuril Islands, which were part of Japan. And since then, this has been a point of contention between the two countries. Actually, it's really an important point for the party in power, the LDP. This is quite conservative and has made a point to have the return of all those islands to mainland Japan. And there's actually a statue and several monuments in the Ministry District, as you can see on the screen. There were some discussions a few years back, but since the return in power of President Putin, all the discussions have stopped. So it's quite an important point that Japan has been pushing for sanctions from the very beginning of the war in Ukraine. And Prime Minister Kishida even visited Kiev, which is a really bold move for a Japanese Prime Minister. The consequences have been immediate. All the oil and the gas that was imported from Russia disappeared immediately. It obliged Japan to go find new sources of oil at spot price. It was absolutely devastating from a financial standpoint. Additionally, the closure of the Russian airspace is impacting Japan a lot because all the tourists and all the goods coming from Europe have an extra 4 to 5 hours of flight to come, and this has a cost on the Japanese economy and on tourism overall. So this is not a move without any consequences. So why did they take such a drastic move? And just before I go into the details, this chart tells me that most of you, dear viewers, are not subscribed to the channel. If you like this type of content, please subscribe and you will know whenever we publish a new one. Or you can also just like it or comment to it. It would help this video be shown to more people and it would help us a lot as well. Thank you very much. Let's continue. The message is actually aimed to China, North Korea, and in some ways to the Japanese public. North Korea has been a thorn on everybody's side since the end of the Korean War. And I'm not just talking about the repeated missiles that are being shot across the Japan Sea or above Japan's mainland, as I've been witnessed many times and as recently as April 13th. There's something more. Actually, during the 70s and the 80s on the Sea of Japan, the North Korean special forces have abducted many Japanese citizens to use them as Japanese teachers for their spies. Actually, Japan has identified 17 Japanese citizens that have disappeared, and there may be many more that have not been identified. North Korea denied it for the longest time until the historic trip of Prime Minister Koizumi in 2002, when he brought back 5 of those abductees. Then, 2 years later, their kids were brought back as well. Since then, we have no news about the remaining abductees. You can imagine the weight, the societal weight of this issue on the Japanese psyche, on the Japanese government, and the relationship on the two countries. China and Japan are very important trade partners to each other, with the total amount of trade between the two countries reaching $371 billion in 2021. And tourism is quite important between the two countries, but especially for Japan. And the Japanese businesses really felt the lack of Chinese tourists during the whole COVID pandemic. Fortunately, they have been back in Japan, back in Tokyo and across the archipelago and the Japanese businesses could not be happier. However, everything is not rosy between the two countries. I'm not going to talk about the World War II issues that are very real and need to be addressed on both sides. But we can talk about the Senkaku Islands, and they are called another name in Chinese. I'm writing it down, but I'm not trying to actually say it, and in Ryukyu language as well. The Senkaku Islands are small islands that have been mainly uninhabited, and they were just used as geographical or navigating points or resting points for fishermen across many years. And it was not basically mapped except from the Chinese a long time ago. Nobody had claimed them completely. But that's the case of Japan since 1895. Very recently, China has claimed historical ownership of those islands, and this has been a big point of contention between the two countries. The coast guard of both countries are getting closer to each other, fishing vessels are being sent across, and this is a very, very important point, especially as this could be a gateway for the Chinese Navy to go into the Pacific Ocean. So this is a very important point, and actually Japan is considering sending a permanent detachment there to protect the island. Additionally, Taiwan is also a very big issue. Most of the oil for Japan, over 80%, is going through the South China Sea, and a lot of its overall trade, as you can see on screen. If Taiwan were to fall into the hands of mainland China, this would pose an existential threat to Japan and South Korea. Japan cannot let Taiwan go back to the mainland. This is so important. That's why the stance that Japan is taking is directly a message to China, saying we are here, we support our allies, and we do not want anything to change. However, many would think Japan is a toothless giant. It has no military. Actually, Japan has a very large marine force, or navy we should say, and it has, as I mentioned before, just announced the largest increase in defense spending since World War II. And it will lead probably to another or an accelerated arms race in the region. And when we remember that both South Korea and Japan are allies with the US, if anything were to happen in Taiwan, this would escalate very, very quickly. There are actually a few issues with this rise in defense spending. The first one, obviously, is the dwindling Japanese population. You need people to be able to be in your military. The second one is the Japanese military hasn't fought any war or any skirmishes since 1945. I let the military expert discuss, but when you have no experience in doing something, if you are thrown into the ring, that might be a bit difficult. The other question is, who is going to pay for this massive increase in spending? There's been talks to increase the taxes to pay for the increase in spending. And the tax that's been discussed is VAT. Problem is, the last time the VAT was increased in 2019, it almost turned the whole country into a recession. So people are very, very cautious, and the Japanese public is not happy about new taxes coming up or potentially coming up because the actual income of the Japanese household has been stagnant for decades already. The other possibility is increasing debt, like every developed country can do. Talking about the US again. But Japan is very, very much into debt, over 200% debt to GDP. And it has had a policy of negative interest rate to be able to manage their debt. And most of this debt is actually held in Japanese yen by Japanese company or by the Bank of Japan. With the recent change at the head of the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, this April, a lot of voices have been raised to change this negative interest rate policy. And the actual rate is creeping up very, very slowly. However, two problems there are, again, if you increase the rates, the service of the debt is going to increase as well. So it's a vicious circle. Also, for the Japanese public, 68% of households have a variable rate mortgage. So if you increase basically the rate of the BOJ, it's going to cascade down to the banks and the variable rates are going to increase. And this is going to pinch, again, the Japanese public and the Japanese consumption, or domestic consumption, I should say. and the Japanese domestic consumption represents 55% of the GDP. So this is going to affect the economy negatively very fast. And there's a lot more making the situation uneasy. For the past year, because of the very low rate and the increase in the interest rate in the US or Europe, the Japanese yen has been in free fall. It has recovered a bit in recent months, but very recently it went back to 140 to the dollars and it may creep up to 150. This is very hard on imports, with most of the oil and the gas being imported is very expensive, and the price of utilities increases for the Japanese household, including myself, reducing the revenue available for domestic consumption. On the flip side, a lot of exporters are very happy because they export in dollars and they repatriate dollars, and that increases their bottom line when they report their earnings. Also, I was mentioning the Nikkei earlier that reached its highest number in 33 years. It's because the Japanese equities become very cheap because of the change and the effects with the dollar and the fact that the exporters are having record profits. So everybody is looking at the Japanese equity in the way that hasn't been done in many years. And a lot of people are saying that Japanese equity may be a good play in the long run. Additionally, a lot of the savings in Japan are on savings accounts that don't pay anything because of the negative interest rate. So a lot of people are looking at the stock market. And now the NISA, or Nippon ISA, the equivalent basically of the IRA in Japan, is going to be changed next year to permit a higher threshold, so people will be able to put more money in the stock market and save it from taxes. So it's going to mechanically put more money, more funds in the stock market and increase the value of the Japanese stocks. So again, the Japanese equities may be an interesting play in the month and maybe the year to come, but it remains to be seen. So it's a very complex situation whereby Japan has to show a strong hand on the global stage to safeguard vital supply lines. And on the other hand, it has to be very cautious with its economy not to plunge into a recession. For investors like us, there might be a play to be done on Japanese equities with the differential interest rate, with the FX, and with the new move that's going to bring a lot more funds onto the Japanese market. We need to be careful about new taxes, changing interest rate, and anything related to geopolitical change in the current situation. If you are interested in investing in the Japanese economy, recently I made this video about 5 ETFs to consider. If you like this video or learned something, please give it a like. Do not hesitate to subscribe for more videos like this one. And if you have anything to say or any suggestion, please leave a comment below. Thank you very much, and until next time, goodbye.